Right, I want to tell you a story about a water bill. Now, stay with me on this one. I came home in October last year, as you know, 2 months after Irenka and the kids, because I'd stayed behind in Greece to winterize the boat and sort things out in the boatyard and obviously deal with the kind of bureaucratic mess that Greek officialdom has quietly perfected over several thousand years. And in my first week back, an email arrived. Now, I'd spent 8 years sourcing, catching, or making our own water. Dockside pipes, rain collection, a water maker for the open ocean passages. We were meticulous about preserving it as well. Every drop tracked. The kids knew the sound of a water pump made Dad anxious and to turn the tap off while brushing their teeth. We lived like that for about 8 years and we got very good at it. And I looked at this bill. I genuinely thought it was a mistake. Our water maker could produce about 40 litres an hour, modest I know compared to modern ones. But the price on that bill, I briefly considered installing a water maker in the bathroom. The sea, like the rain, doesn't charge for water. It doesn't send a bill. Welcome to the cost of the return ticket. Welcome back to the Cost of Freedom series. I'm Woody. This is episode 5 in this particular series. We've talked about money, we've talked about education, socialization, safety. We've gone through most of the questions the Telegraph readers wanted answering. But there's one more cost I haven't shown you and nobody asked about. And it's not the cost of the boat, it's not the cost of the journey, it's the cost of the return ticket. So let me paint a picture of who I was at sea. For 8 years, I was the person who kept us moving. Autopilot failure between the Galapagos and French Polynesia, sorted. Steering failure in the Indian Ocean, 200 miles from the nearest port, sorted. Sea drive, stripped down, and shaft replacement in Malaysia. Took 3 weeks, but sorted. The boat was always trying to kill itself, and sometimes us too. My job was to not let it, and we're living proof that I got quite good at it. You come home from something like that, and you expect the same version of yourself to show up on land, and he doesn't. The skills that made you useful at sea, resourcefulness, innovative, calm under pressure, able to fix an engine with a beer can and industrial language, let's say, they don't have the same currency back home. Nobody's impressed that you can identify a failed impeller by the smell. There's no definition to file that skill set under. At sea, your worth is demonstrated every single day. The boat moves or it doesn't, the anchor holds or it doesn't, you make it to the next port or you don't. The feedback is constant, immediate, and sometimes brutally honest. Land is different. On land, worth is measured by what you earn and what you do for a living. And for the first time in 8 years, the honest answer to what do I do was complicated. I'm writing a book, I'm building a platform, I'm working on it. Working on it is the fine answer when you're perhaps 40. It lands differently when you're 50-something like me. Your kids are teenagers now who need things. And you recently spent an afternoon trying to get your head around AI. Under skills on my new CV, I've got boat maintenance, navigation, and the ability to back a 53-foot ketch into a 40-foot berth in a 25-knot crosswind. I've not been contacted by any recruiters yet. The humiliation of that gap between who you were at sea and who you are on land is something nobody warns you about, which is why I'm addressing it now. People mention reverse culture shock in passing, the way a doctor mentions a side effect. But in all honesty, it's not a side effect. It's the main event when you're coming back and going through it. We talked about money in episode 1, the actual numbers, what the boat cost, what the journey cost, how we made it work. But there's a part of that story I left out. Shoes. We spent 8 years in shorts, t-shirts and sandals, actually barefoot most of the time. I owned about 3 t-shirts, 2 pairs of shorts and a pair of sailing boots that I wore on serious passages and absolutely nowhere else. Coming back to the UK in October, we had to buy coats and shoes. I stood blinking at the prices, the way you stare at a marine mechanic who's just quoted you the cost of a 1-inch weld. Inflation doesn't wait around for you. The cost of everything crept up while we were gone, the way it creeps up on everyone, admittedly, except everyone else was in it like a frog in a slowly heating pan, adapting to it, habituating to each new price rise as it arrived. We got 8 years of inflation all at once. We'd lived on roughly £2,000 a month towards the end for 5 people. Fuel, food, marina fees, maintenance, everything. We were efficient because we had to be. We came home thinking, we know how to live cheaply, we'll be fine. We were not, as it turned out, entirely fine, because cheap on a boat is a different discipline to cheap on land. On the boat, cheap is an anchorage in a beautiful bay and eating local food. On land, cheap means your kids can't do what their friends are doing. We also lost our main income stream the day we moved back in. 8 years of rental income, the thing that funded a significant chunk of our journey, gone overnight because we needed the house. Although, to be fair, we still rent out part of it even now, and it's not really that big. I can see 10 ways on how to build something. I've got ideas, a story worth telling, and genuinely no shortage of things to try. Now, what I don't have is capital, and I'm aware that that's not a unique problem, but it is a particularly maddening one when you've spent 8 years proving you can make things work with a sardine tin and a plastic bottle from a recycled bin. Something I only understood after we got home too. The boat wasn't just the boat. It was a shared purpose for the family, a reason every single day to pull in the same direction. When you're on passage, everyone has a role. The problem is under you, above you, in front of you, and the solution requires all of you to work as a team. As I was thinking about this, Darroch was in Switzerland, Rowan in Yorkshire. Irenka is a few miles along the coast, I think. Yewan is in his room on a screen, which is technically in the same house, but you wouldn't always know it. On the boat, you always knew where everyone was, usually because you could hear them. Our boat was 53 foot long. There's nowhere to disappear to on a 53-foot boat, really. The irony of land freedom is that it includes the freedom to be in completely separate rooms and have almost nothing to do with each other. We didn't have that problem at sea. We had every other problem, but not that particular one. Marriage, parenting, family, all of it works more cleanly when there's a common adversary to organise against. The weather, the sea, navigating the next passage, take that away and you drift. Not dramatically, but quietly. Irenka is extroverted, practical and physical. She's thrown herself into gardening, sailing instruction, community. I'm more introverted, creative, solitary. I write, I think, I build and mend things slowly. On the boat, those differences were exactly what we needed. I fixed things, she organised things. It was a balance that kept it moving. On land, the same differences pull in opposite directions. It's not a crisis, really. It's just an adjustment, but it's one we have to make deliberately. The sea made it for us for 8 years, and now back on land, we're having to find things to make adjustments intentionally. There's a thing that happens when you've lived outside the Western bubble for a long time as well. You see it differently when you come back. Not better or worse, just differently. Most people here live as though the infrastructure of civilized life is just a baseline, like it's a natural condition. Healthcare, the roads, the bins being taken away regularly, hot water, power at the flick of a switch. We went to places where none of those things existed. We sat in anchorages where the nearest hospital was a 4-hour plane ride away, but there were no planes and there were no airports. We anchored off coastlines where people on shore were living on less in a year than most people spend in a week back home. You come back knowing that what we have here is not a default. It has to be maintained and actively maintained by systems and institutions that require really looking after. And watching some of those systems start to fray back here, like the NHS being the obvious one here in the UK, it kind of feels different when you know what the alternatives look like up close. That's not a political statement, by the way. It's just perspective. We gave our kids the world, literally. 40 countries, 8 years, the kind of childhood most people only read about. But their peers have different things and different priorities. Things that come from parents who spent those same 8 years giving them financial stability instead of crossing the Pacific. Now, that's not regret. It's just an inevitable and acknowledged cost of what we did. And although there was no way of predicting the direction the world would go in, it's something I wish I'd given a bit more thought to before we went. Because if Irenka and me are struggling with it, imagine what it's like for a teenager navigating their own sense of purpose and identity for the first time in their life. So we've spent 5 episodes now, I think, going through the Telegraph comments, the education concerns, the money question, the socialization worry, the safety accusations, reasonable concerns mostly from people looking at the cost from the outside. But there's a cost that they didn't ask about, and that one arrives after you get home. It's the identity you have to rebuild. It's the cost of living you didn't plan for. It's the purpose that the sea provided. All those things that you now have to find someplace else. Don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you not to go to sea and to live your adventure. I'm telling you what it actually costs. Because the honest answer to was it worth it? It's obviously yes. But be fully aware of what's going on the invoice. Because going to sea with all of its free water still has its costs. And now, like I say, 8 years, 40,000 miles, 40 countries, 3 kids who are by any measure remarkable, and 1 return ticket. And that, to be fair, we hadn't really budgeted for. But obviously, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Now, that's my version of events. Starting next week, hopefully, Irenka joins me again, and we'll be discussing all of it. The money aspect, the safety, the education, the coming home, and offer what will most likely be, well, let's say a significantly different interpretation of my key points, naturally. Now, if you've ever watched any of our old cockpit sessions, you'll already know that we don't always agree. I don't think that's going to change. If you want the longer version of all of this in a slightly more book-shaped form, there's a link in the description below. But in the meantime, I'm Woody, and this is the Mothership podcast. See you next week.